Okay, great. Well, given that it is 4:02, we are going to get started. And I'm grateful that people are kind of coming in. And as you come in, you can say where you're coming from in the chat and hear about what's happening. So welcome everyone to this really exciting webinar today with the Wild Seed Project and the Ash Protection Collaboration across Wabanakik team. We are really excited to be able to have these four people here today to answer some questions that were pre-submitted and also have some time for you all to build the conversation as it feels best. So I'm going to turn it over in a moment, but as we begin this program that will engage us in questions of plants in place, I do want to start within the understanding that the work that the Wild Seed Project does is located within the ancestral Wabanaki territory we now call Maine, and that we recognize the inherent sovereignty of the tribes of the Wabanaki, the people of the Dawn, the Abenaki, Holton Band of Maliseet Indians, Mi'kmaq Nation, the Penobscot Nation, and the Passamaquoddy tribe. We support the continued work for justice, self-determination, and decolonization. And the work of engaging reciprocally in place necessitates understanding the violence that settler colonialism has enacted. So it is important that we ask ourselves, what does it mean to build and rebuild reciprocal relationships with people, plants, fungi, soil, water, and air? Reestablishing resilient ecosystems centered on relationships is an important piece of deconstructing colonial legacy. Today, we are so grateful to have the opportunity to learn with the APCAW team about recentering, protecting, and restoring the ongoing sacred relationship between Wabanaki people and ash trees. And I will now turn it over to John Daigle, Tyler Everett, Emily Francis, and Ellen McDonald to introduce themselves and their role in this team before we start answering questions.
Great, thank you. My name is John Daigle, and thank you very much for joining the webinar today. It's really great to see the variety of places that people are joining from in the Northeast, so I'm really excited about that. Yeah, my name is John Daigle. I'm a citizen member of the Penobscot Nation and also a professor at the School of Forest Resources at the University of Maine. I've been working on the emerald ash borer concerns about ash for about a decade now, and it really was all initiated by tribal members here in Maine, basket makers and basket tree harvesters who had heard about the emerald ash borer in other places in the United States at that time. And since that time, we've really created a collaborative effort to seek ways to try to sustain ash in our forest landscapes, and the Wild Seed Project is certainly one of the project members that's really important in our efforts coming down the road next year or so, along with other entities like the Maine Forest Service and other institutions like University of Vermont and other tribal partners like the Akwesasne Nation in New York. So lots of different partners. But today we're going to talk about the seed collection effort that's going to be underway. This is kind of a conversation that we're going to have today, but we have more formal training that's planned in the coming months. And I'll have my students who are a part of the APCAW team here introduce themselves. And Emily, you want to go first?
Sure, thank you, John. My name is Emily Francis, and I'm a PhD candidate in the School of Forest Resources at the University of Maine. I am a member of the APCAW lab, and my focus is on the social science, more communication within the network of people involved with the emerald ash borer and ash issue in Maine and beyond here in the Dawnlands. So I have worked with private landowners on a private landowner study. I've created the seed collection document that I believe Nell sent the link to before the start of this presentation when you registered, which we'll also put in a link for you to look at if you're interested. And I'm also, like I said, working on the social network side of this larger movement here in the state and what has been done in the past decade or so, focusing on how to protect ash and work against the emerald ash borer. And a lot of the work that I do has been focused on tribal needs and tribal values to make sure that that is in the forefront of the work being done across all levels. So I can pass it off to Tyler.
Thanks, Emily. It's great to see everybody joining to talk about ash trees. We love ash trees at the APCAW lab, so it's always great to see people coming out for that. My name is Tyler Everett. I'm a citizen of Mi'kmaq Nation, and I have basket makers in my family history. And it means a lot to me that I get to now focus my research on this cultural practice, this cultural art, and this really culturally significant species of tree. And I've really enjoyed and learned a lot from various basket makers and ash harvesters, and in the research realm from other researchers, some tribal and some non-tribal, and that I've just learned so much, and I'm happy to share some of that knowledge here today, and I'm excited to talk more specifically about the collection of ash seeds and what that means for the future of ash here in the Dawnland or present day Maine. And I'll pass it off to Ella.
Thanks, Tyler, and thanks everybody for being here and Wild Seed Project for organizing. My name is Ella McDonald. I'm now a second-year master's student at UMaine, working under John on researching ash as well. I'm a person of settler descent. I'm not Indigenous. I live on Penobscot land in Old Town on the Penobscot River. And I came previously from a background in relationship building between conservation groups and Wabanakik people, specifically around land returns and land access. And through that, building those relationships, I learned about the cultural importance of ash and also built my own relationship, it feels like, with the tree. So in short, I'm here because I care about ash and I understand the deep interconnections between forest ecosystems and cultural practices. And I think there are really great opportunities now to lean in and organize so that we can keep this species on the landscape for future generations. And there's a lot of hope. I'm helping sort of organize a public outreach program for APCAW. We have a number of trainings and events, and also helping support website development so that we can get the word out more and organize folks in the public to protect this species too. Yeah, really happy to be here and to have this conversation with you all.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. And Ella, thanks for reminding. I will put the APCAW website and some of the upcoming events that are specifically around seeds into the chat as the conversation goes on. So in kicking this conversation off, I think you saw that in an email from me last week, there was some information, including the first introductory webinar to the work of APCAW, and then the seed collecting manual. And then there was a place to submit some questions. And I'm in gratitude for those who did and took some time to read through and really let this information sit with them and ask really thoughtful questions. And there were three kind of main themed questions that came out of the questions that were submitted. And then I'm going to offer each of those to this group as kind of conversation starters. And then as it goes along, there will be then time at the end for people to ask questions live. And the way that you're going to do that is you're going to raise your hand, and then I can make it so that you can talk and we can hear your questions. So, or you can put questions into the chat and I will read them aloud. But to start this conversation, a big question that people were curious about is how individuals, organizations, and landowners get involved with APCAW. And so maybe we can start there.
Great. And I think what we could do is maybe have Ella start us out, since she's in charge of the APCAW website, which is really our main mechanism for coordinating our current and I think future efforts. So Ella, do you want to address that question?
Yeah, for sure. There are many, many different ways that you can plug into our work. We've had a number of webinars already, which you can watch on our YouTube, but we also have some really exciting future events. I think one of the best ways that you can get involved is by looking into your local forests, local communities, and paying attention to the spread of EAB around you. That can involve making sure that your town or city has monitoring traps set up. It can also mean doing an ash inventory in your backyard, which Tyler has really helped us provide a structure around how to do that. And there's a webinar on how to begin an ash inventory in your community. But moving into the future, I think it's really hopeful and exciting to get folks to collect seed. We're going to have some seed collection trainings in August and September that we hope you'll plug into, and that you'll spread the word out. This effort will only work with a lot of volunteers. So if you're hooked by this talk and feel passionate about ash and protecting ash, I would say get your friends together and go out in the woods and collect seed. And we'll provide sort of a structure for what to do with that seed after you've done it. Yeah, and also if you want to do some experimenting yourself, it's going to take an army to figure out how we can propagate ash and grow it in a sustainable way. So you could even try growing ash seed in your backyard. Another way that you can connect with our work is by visiting our website and reading through all the resources we have on there. We're working on building a resource library that has academic articles about ash published on it. But we have a lot of really accessible information about how to do ash inventory and how to do seed collection on there, as well as links to register for all of our events. Another really great resource is the state website, where they share information about the Emerald Ash Borer quarantine and basic tips for finding EAB and monitoring for EAB. Yeah, that's what I'll start with, and we hope to see you guys at some of our future events.
Thanks, Ella. I just wanted to add to, as this collaboration grows, we've really gotten a lot of support from a variety of different entities like the Land Trust community and their listservs to talk about APCAW and what steps can be done. Networks through the Wild Seed Project, even the Maine State Bureau of Parks and Lands, Maine Forest Service. And it also includes other states like Vermont and their Land Trust community. So it is kind of a growing community that I think you can start to, tap into partly from our website, but also locally within your state entities. I think hopefully we're going to be seeing some efforts that's, being done here in Maine, but there's also other places in the Northeast that want to try to do something similar around seed collection work and ash protection work. So that's why I'm so pleased to see so many of you in other states, because we really need to be looking at a large scale effort in trying to retain ash in our forests. It really it needs to require a lot of different landowners, different types of landowners that have interest in this.
Yeah, thank you for that really awesome starting point. That I agree that it's exciting that there's lots of different people coming from wearing different communities in this group today, and hopefully you can start this conversation in your group. So, and that's also a great segue into our next question. That was kind of the main question or main themed question, which is how will seeds play an important role in this effort? And that kind of touches on seed collecting, seed saving, seed banking, genetic diversity, and population resilience as all important parts of this effort. And the way that that will then like inform or be a part of cultural longevity of the ash as well. So yeah, we're excited to hear your thoughts on seeds and their importance.
Yeah, and this is a great segue into Emily's work in crafting the seed collection manual and really leading some of our efforts with the seed collection work. So Emily, do you want to take
Sure.
that question?
Thank you, John. So if you've heard me speak before, and even if you haven't, I like to just start by saying that the seed manual that I wrote and what has been made available to you, and there's a link in the chat, really came out of a need from the basket making and harvesting community of Wabanakik artisans in Maine, and a call to action for how to collect seed. And my background is not in forestry and silviculture. So for me, it was really from the very bare bones of, what is an ash tree to how do we get seed? And so I started at the very bottom with all of this and creating this document in what you have before you today. And it was a really interesting process to see that what was out there and available for people to collect seed and how to do it turned out to be a very scientific and institutional, very dry direction coming from academic and federal resources from, the U.S. Forest Service, and not something that was particularly accessible to just a landowner who was interested in collecting. And there was direction on how to do it, but then what do you do with the seed? And so that's really where APCAW came to be, when we figured out that not only did the direction need to be created and needed to be written for a different audience, but it also needed to be what can be done with the seed now that it's been collected. And we've had excellent help from the St. Regis Mohawk tribe of the Akwesasne Nation in New York. Les Benedict is our just been an amazing resource, who he himself has worked on ash for over 25 years before emerald ash borer was on this continent. So he has some amazing background and just knowledge on the tree that this document would not have been created without him. And it was a huge help in a starting point to have this created. So now we have this document. And there are so many avenues once you have the seed of what can be done. And Nell really highlighted, there's genetic research, there's propagation, there's just getting the tree, more of the tree on the landscape as EAB comes in. We're working with Penn State researchers, Dr. Jill Hamilton, who's doing genetic research that works with actual ash leaves rather than the seeds. So there's a lot that can be done with more than just the seed when it comes to the tree. Nell, would you like to redirect me and what exactly that question was?
Absolutely. And I think you were 100% answering it. So
Okay.
needed, but just like, yeah, I think that in thinking about the way in which a lot of, or not all restoration research, especially in academia, is focused around seeds. And so like, what is the value of seeds in this work?
Sure. So the value in this work is a time crunch. If we are unable to collect seed when it is available because of the danger and threat of emerald ash borer, when the trees are gone, there's no way to get that back. There's no way to get that genetic material back. So it's really a time crunch to make sure that when the seeds are being produced, that we can get out on the landscape and collect that seed and bring it into the seed banks and into the research and back into planting, to be able to create more seeds, create more trees, which will create more seeds. And Tyler is able to explain that part of it really well with like live seed banking and that sort of stuff. But really it's just ash only, particularly brown ash, which is near and dear to all of us. We love all ash, but brown ash in particular is critical to the Wabanakik people. And so we want to make sure that we get seed from brown ash trees, and they don't seed every year. It can be an 8-year span between years that you're going to see seed on the trees. Would maybe now be a good time for Tyler to touch on some seed stuff? Would you like to talk about that, Tyler, a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. When I think about the values of seed, when it comes to forest management, we're always thinking about the next generation of ash trees when we want to manage a forest for a particular outcome. In this case, when we're thinking about ash forest, and in particular brown ash wetland forests, we really want to see that next generation of ash trees begin to develop in the understory, so that when emerald ash borer comes through and it does decimate, and we know that at all these sites it will decimate a lot of the overstory trees, that there's a generation of ash trees underneath that could be the replacement of those overstory trees. And that's critically important because those trees would be our next source of seed moving forward. In any non-native insect or disease or pathogen, there's a lack of natural enemies and a lack of resistance in our native vegetation and species to that threat. And the only way that that begins to develop, whether it's introduced by us, like through the release of biological controls, or it's done through genetic work to try and create resistance through breeding programs, all of it takes a lot of time. And forests do slowly develop over time, but emerald ash borer can feast on ash trees at a very alarming rate. And so it's really important that we think about seed, whether it be on the ground and waiting in the soil profile to propagate when conditions are right, or if it's seed that we collect and store in a long-term storage facility at the federal level, or even small scale locally in freezers like the Wild Seed Project, and we are planning to do at APCAW and in the university, and our tribal nation partners are trying to do in their facilities. All of that seed is like liquid gold, because you can propagate those trees and rematriate them to the landscape as emerald ash borer does decimate those forests. And the more we learn about these forests, the more successful we can be in doing that. And a big part of that is finding where those trees are, knowing those sites. And you can all do that by going into the forest that finding ash trees, seeing if they're producing seed, seeing where they're growing really well, seeing where they're not doing too good, seeing if maybe it's emerald ash borer that might be in those forests. And we also have a wealth of knowledge in basket makers and ash harvesters. They've been doing that since time immemorial through their families. So every time you get to talk with a basket maker or ash harvester, they just share an abundance of knowledge about these forests, about these trees, how they interact with those trees, how those trees operate in their ecosystem. And they're also the first to often say, hey, I saw some ash seed at this site, and that's when hopefully we can get out and collect it. And so I think we can all take a page out of that book and be monitoring for ash seed, because brown ash doesn't produce seed every year, just to be cognizant and potentially seize the opportunity when brown ash is producing seed.
Thank you. And yeah, I think that that's just such an important reminder, is that we all exist in place. And so part of taking responsibility for that place and building relationship with that place is just like getting to know what lives there with us. So that's a very important first entry point. I think this also then kind of moves us well into this third kind of part of these three main themed questions, is that where is the hope for the future of ASH, and where, like, what keeps you all working towards this? And that can be personal or however you want to answer this, but I think that a lot of people have curiosity about that.
Yeah, I guess I can start, and I know Emily, Ellen, Tyler will all chime in too. But I have to say that, that hope, at least for me, has really kind of been growing more in recent years than, a lot of the devastation that we were seeing with the emerald ash borer outbreaks, and, thousands and thousands of trees dying. And we're still going to see that, but but still knowing that there's still live ash trees in Michigan where it first was detected, a couple decades ago. And knowing that there's still research going on with interest and showing promise in terms of some of the genetic resistance of some ash trees, and the ability to repopulate some of these places with trees that are resistant to the emerald ash borer, so they can kind of coexist. And all of those things really, I think, have been, happening within the past couple, 2-3 years. So I think research is really helping us see some light at the end of the tunnel. I think we're still going to go through a lot of dark stages, at least here in Maine, because most of our ash trees are still alive, but we know that most of them are going to die, through emerald ash borer. And a lot of our efforts and strategies are really focused around kind of the post EAB, when EAB has kind of gone through an area. Hopefully we've collected the seed, like Emily, and Tyler have talked about. But really a lot of our effort is kind of after the EAB has kind of gone through, populations kind of settle out a little bit more, that we might be able to develop some strategies where we have these ash trees kind of coexist with emerald ash borer, because EAB is not going to be going away. We have to come up with strategies where they can kind of coexist with each other. And some of the science that is out there right now is telling us that this might be able to work. So that gives me a lot of hope. Plus, the final thing is, what gives me hope is the tremendous interest that I see with people who want to try to protect ash. It was always really evident in the tribal communities. I've been working with partners my grandparents were basket makers, just like Tyler. They have a real intense relationship and interest in this tree and its well-being, but it goes beyond tribal communities. Landowners and others really kind of want to see this ash tree stay in our community, which I think gives us hope. So with that, whoever wants to go next can, Emily or Tyler or Ella.
I'll go next. What gives me hope for maintaining ash on the landscape is definitely like there's lots of times when you're reading research papers, when you're reading the latest quarantine update, the detections, it can be pretty depressing. Like a lot of things in natural resources, unfortunately, we always seem to put the bad out in the forefront of what we're getting for content. But when I come to meetings like this and we talk about brown ash, all ash trees, and the efforts being done by different parties to try and protect this one tree, there's lots of really moving and inspirational stories that give me hope. And I know that it's got to just manifest in everybody that's a part of the network. So that is probably the most hopeful thing in all of this. Plus, we're not going to have a future where there's not going to be some other tree that's impacted by some new novel pest. And that tree very well could be, and I mean, a lot of these trees in our forest are culturally significant. They all are to some extent. And so we'll be in a situation like this again if we can take the lessons we've learned so far in this story of emerald ash borer and lots of other novel pests that we've encountered. That's a very hopeful thing that we can apply it further down the line. And then what's most hopeful to me about the future of brown ash, I think, is the genetic work. I think at the federal level, a lot of effort was put forth to try and put some focus on the biological controls, these little parasitoid wasps that inject their eggs into the eggs of emerald ash borer, and they feed on those eggs, and they would be a natural enemy of emerald ash borer. Sometimes they lay their eggs into the larvae directly and can act as a regulator of emerald ash borer populations here in North America. All of those are from Asia, and we're releasing them here and tested over a really rigorous process to make sure that they're very host specific. So they're not going to be taking out non-target species in their release. There's a risk to it, but the reward is far outweighing those risks. And so I think it is a great program. But what I see that program doing is just buying time for the genetic work. So we've got lots of great research being done by lots of folks. Some of our partners, Jennifer Cook in the U.S. Forest Service and Jill Hamilton with Penn State. Some researchers really doing some amazing work in mapping the full genealogy of brown ash and other ash species across Turtle Island, and also looking more specifically at traits and those that are aligned with resistance in ash trees in Asia that are resistant to emerald ash borer, and finding actual resistance in trees here in North America to emerald ash borer. And so that's something I'm really excited to see, because it means all these efforts that we're doing to protect the tree, maybe make those sites more tolerant to emerald ash borer through management, or collect the seed to buy us time to see some of these come to fruition. I think that that's exciting. It's showing that that's not a futile effort. We're making progress toward maybe a future where ash on the landscape is not so far-fetched as it might have been just 5-6 years ago.
I can jump in from there, Tyler. I think especially for maybe some of the younger generations, I've heard people talk about the Dutch elm disease and chestnut blight, and there were these collective tragedies where we seemingly lost a species that was well loved and very prominent, especially in the Eastern United States. And we, being involved in the ash research, had a little bit of a head start and a handle to be able to monitor this threat coming across the United States for the last 20 years. And that's a huge benefit, to be able to go out and collect seed and map this stuff. And we're already making leaps and bounds ahead of what had happened to these other two well-beloved species. And while this is an insect and not a fungus or a virus or something like that, it's a little bit different. It's still, like Tyler said, this is going to happen again to another species. That's inevitable. And the psychology of losing species, a lot of people will talk about Michigan, I think John did, where you have these stands that are desolate now, is tragic and affects all of us. So I think there is a lot more hope to the fact that we have had enough of a jump on it, especially in Maine, where we're getting out and we're already on the ground. And when I started in 2020, and in 2021, the federal government lifted the federal quarantine. And that was a huge blow as a researcher, to think that the federal government had washed their hands and that's not exactly what happened because they have so many other things they have to tackle. But Maine stood firm and said, you know, we're gonna do what we can to limit the spread. And the work that has been done by the state has been tremendous and commendable, in my opinion. I think the work has been excellent, and also very much being pushed by the tribes here in Maine to in the Dawnland to ensure the survival, and talking to the tribes in the Great Lakes region where this started, as well as in New York where they have had EAB for a while. It's a real story of hope and perseverance and resilience to make sure that this is on the landscape for as long as possible. And just the network that has come out of this is hope beyond measure, with, you know, people who are really dedicating their time and their efforts beyond what would be expected. So I think that there's a lot of hope. There's still some trauma to come as we see the loss of the trees. I know people talk about trees in Portland already being affected, but there is hope because we have a jump on this. So Ella, would you like to round us out here?
Sure, these are all really beautiful things that have been said. But I'll just add that I think the thing that gives me the most hope is seeing people build a relationship with the ash tree in their own way. We've had people show up to some of our workshops talking about ash trees as their friends, or getting to know ash trees as children. I've had people send poems to me about ash trees. And I think that's really exciting because with that relationship comes responsibility. And historically, I think especially settler cultures saw ash as not having very much value because it didn't have a lot of value to timber companies. And I think that I'm seeing a big change in people who, inspired by Wabanakik artisans, are now reaching across the table and learning to treat this tree with respect and pay attention to it in a way that's much broader than just its economic value. And I also think, like everybody has mentioned, this alliance that is growing beyond colonial borders is really exciting to me. That our collaboration has been able to involve folks in Canada. Just this morning we were emailing with someone there, and that we've had folks come all the way down from there to our workshops. So I think that there's a lot of healing in that process of working together, that is bringing us together after this separation of borders. And yeah, I think that we invite everybody here into community with us and into relationship with ash trees, because that's what's it's going to take to protect the species.
Thank
Great.
you all so much. Sorry, John, I don't want to interrupt you.
Oh, no, I was gonna say, I just noticed other questions coming in the chat. So maybe that might be a good time, and I don't know if you want to lead that, Andrea.
Oh,
or
yeah.
I can
Yeah,
start.
go for it. This is great. I was just going to say thank you it's really nice to hear you all talk about this as people attached to this, like in so many different ways. So with that, yeah, there's great questions coming in the chat. And John, if you want to choose the ones that feel the best to start answering, that's great. And also if people want to raise their hand, I can also take some time to have people speak into the conversation as well. So I'll just be over here doing that.
Okay, yeah, and again, if someone wants to chime in, if I miss someone's question as I'm going through them, please re-enter or just let us know. But one of the questions was what percentage of mature ash trees are left, and does EAV affect young trees? And Tyler is our forester silviculturalist, and I could answer a little bit, but maybe Tyler, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, sure. I was reading, did you say what percentage of mature ash trees are left, and the emerald ash borer affecting young trees? Those are the ones.
Yep.
So it's really hard to answer what percentage of mature ash trees are left. For one, it really varies dependent upon how long emerald ash borer has been established in a particular area. There are areas where, there's 100% mortality. We can't say that in science. We say 99%, but there are areas where we've seen that degree of impact from emerald ash borer. And so that's young and mature ash trees. That's where a lot of those really dark terms come along from the literature, like orphan cohort. So it's the offspring of those that had passed along or passed away. They're the last line of defense for ash at that site. They don't have parents to help sustain the population beyond them. So unless they make it to maturity, there is no seed source at that site. So there are areas where I see someone had mentioned that Indiana, that majority of the ash trees had mature ash trees are gone, and that is being seen in some places. There is efforts though to try and inject some of those mature seed-bearing ash trees in the overstory, even in the forested setting. It's an expensive treatment, but that can help sustain some of those trees, some of those mature trees that would be seed sources for future generations in the overstory. And so we don't need to necessarily accept that narrative that all of the overstory or mature ash trees are going to die because of emerald ash borer. In a lot of those places, there was no management that occurred. And so if there was an overstory tree that was like really in decline, that was like a population burst for emerald ash borer, because it was like a beacon for beetles to flock to. And then it was an easily targeted tree to create more and more generations of emerald ash borer beetles, and then create a local boom in emerald ash borer population at that site. And so what that ends up happening, or what ends up happening when that occurs, is that there's so many emerald ash borer beetles that they start to even infest some of those smaller diameter trees. And so you don't have a situation where only overstory trees are lost because of emerald ash borer. You start to see some of those smaller diameter trees, and that's when you start to see 100% mortality. And so that would be like a lesson learned in the lake states, that maybe doing nothing and letting nature take its course is not a great approach in some stands. Some stands that's fine, but in some that may not be the good approach. So emerald ash borer does affect young trees in some circumstances, and the rule of thumb is that they may attack trees as small as 2 inches in diameter, so very young saplings in the understory. But if you do some management to try and limit those decadent stems in the overstory, you might make it a little bit more tolerant to emerald ash borer and see those small saplings that are in that 2-inch size class or similar survive the initial wave of emerald ash borer.
Great. Thanks, Tyler. And related to kind of a similar question that we had about lessons learned in Michigan, I think a couple key lessons learned, at least with Nate Siegert with the U.S. Forest Service again, who has done a lot of work in Michigan and other states, and is a strong partner here in Maine. One of the things that he repeatedly talks about is, again, the timing for collecting ash seed, because again, a lot of that has been lost now in Michigan. So now is the time. We in Maine have a lot of mature ash that's still available that can be producing seed before EAB attacks those trees. So really, one of the lessons learned is collect that seed when it is available, because there's only a certain amount of time that will be available to collect that seed. And like Emily talked about, once it's gone, it's kind of gone. And so that's certainly one of the key lessons learned, I think, from Michigan and early places where we've had that infestation, is be proactive in some of the strategies. I think another lesson learned too, and this is kind of tied to Tyler's work here in Maine with his PhD work, is really also trying to be proactive in natural regeneration of ash, so that you have different stages of ash trees growing. Even though EAB might be attacking all of them, you still want to have those younger trees coming And they will survive to a certain extent before the EAB will attack those trees. But again, thinking through different stages of ash that hopefully we can kind of have on the landscape, I think is another important thing. And in some cases, being kind of proactive in a sense to try to create that structure early on, if you can. Because in some places where you only have mature ash trees without any regeneration occurring underneath, really makes that a susceptible spot for EAB. And once it attacks, you don't have that other regeneration occurring. So so there are really important lessons learned as that we're going to kind of continue to learn from. And I just want to point out again, our partners in New York with APCAW, that again, implementing different strategies, they're another beacon for us to learn from to help inform us here in the Northeast, in Maine, with what strategies are working, how we might want to tweak that. So there's still things to be learned, that's kind of going on other places in the country that can help inform us here in the Northeast. So that's why these partnerships and meetings that we have are so important to share that information. Okay. Let's see. Kind of lost track of the questions. Does someone else want to help me with a question I might have missed?
I'll jump in. So it looked like there were also a couple cool ones about seeds. And there was one that asks, understanding that brown ash seeds are most critical culturally, are seeds from all three ash species being collected and banked? And is there different protocols or I'm just expanding on that question. Are there different protocols for the different ash seeds?
I can jump into that one. Protocols are all the same, other than you just need to be able to tell the difference between brown, which is also called black if you're looking in a field guide outside of Maine. It is probably going to be called black ash. Here in Maine, it's affectionately called brown ash. But the actual protocol for collecting is pretty much the same. It is being collected and stored. All three species of ash that is found in Maine is being collected and stored at the federal level. Because of the timber value in white and green, those have been collected more so than brown black ash. And that is another reason why it's important to collect brown ash as much as possible, because the seed banking at the federal level particularly doesn't have brown ash to the levels that it has green and white. Historically, it just was considered just not that interesting or important of a tree to collect, unfortunately. So there just isn't as much of a like a strong base of it at the federal level, which is the USDA. It's a section of the USDA Agricultural Research Service that has the large seed banks that we think of when we think of huge seed banks. But there is an ash germplasm lab that's in Ames, Iowa, that does look specifically at ash. But still, they don't have as much of the brown ash seed available, which is why another reason that we push that. But the protocol is all the same. You just, when you are collecting, need to make sure you know which tree you are collecting, because that has to go onto the forms, which then will go into, we have to make sure that we know what we're getting when we open the bag of seed.
Great. And I did see a question about maps that might be available where you could maybe find ash trees and brown ash trees. And there's a couple sources that I would recommend. Again, the Maine Forest Service has maps that are available, kind of distribution maps, species distribution maps. And they also have contact information for local foresters, state foresters in different parts of the state. And I assume that would be this case like for New Hampshire and other states, where you can get in touch with the local forester that I think has a pretty good handle, with the forest and in that where they're working in that part of the state. So that would be another resource. So there's people that you can start to reach out to try to get more information related to your forest. questions that you might have. So I did want to address that question. Let's see.
I don't want to jump over anybody else's question, but one of the last questions asked about larger ecosystem impacts. And that's been something that I've been really interested in for a long time now. And we are seeing, there have been recent studies that have come out that there are specific invertebrate insects that do rely on ash specific. And with the loss of ash trees on the landscape, we are going to see a loss of specific invertebrates, which is then going to have a cascading effect on all the trophic levels of, who eats who in the ecosystem. So I'm not sure if that particular study is on our website yet. That reminds me, Ella, I should get that to you. It's not. But there are now studies that are saying we are going to lose specific insects that do rely on, and there have been papers back maybe 8 years ago that talked about how it affects urban birds, that there has been changes in what birds eat in Ohio. There was a specific study on that. So those are just, I just wanted to mention that because that is something that we haven't touched on as much in our group and is something that's more being discovered and found out about at this point in the research on a broader scale.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, again, with more research that's being done, I think that's even further motivated other landowners like the land trust and conservation groups who, again, are kind of seeing the connections of this ash tree to other species that makes it a priority to try to protect, for a variety of things besides the cultural. The cultural is very important, but there's also the ecological. That's also very important.
There was one more question in here that I found interesting because I think that it's fun to come in contact with the fact that the human time scale is just one time scale of many time scales that we're operating in. And the question was, how many years will it take until an ash planted from seed will begin producing seed? And there's a lot of other things that would require to produce seed. But I think that that's a kind of cool, maybe ending point with this last couple of minutes we have of what is the long-term timeline of this project?
That's another great lesson learned from Les. Lessons from Les. We could start a whole blog. Some of their early efforts, they propagated some ash seed and then planted them in pots, and they thought they failed. So they threw those pots out into the soil just to let it decompose. And then the next year there were ash trees growing because, so the lesson learned there was that there is a 2-year stratification, both in soil and soil moisture and temperature in order to get propagation for ash seed, which is a big part of the protocol that Wild Seed and Emily are working on for all of you to maybe take advantage of down the line. But those trees grew for 15 years before they produced seed in New York. Now that was in someone's front yard with someone who could water them, take care of them. I think they even put some deterrents for insects and stuff near them. So they were in great condition to grow and produce seed. And they do, they produce an absurd amount of seed when there's a good seed bank. We collected seed from it last year. So 15 years is on probably the earlier side. 20 years is probably more average for an ash tree, as long as it's not being choked out in the understory. And that's, I think, something that also can really derail that timeline if there isn't some sort of impact that causes a gap in the canopy to bring those understory ash trees into the overstory. They may not produce seed for much, much longer than 20 years. And so even though there are really young saplings, you don't really know how old they are. You don't know how long they've been just hanging out, waiting for their opportunity to poke up into the overstory. And so if you go through and do some of these treatments and remove some of the low vigor trees that would be beacons to emerald ash borer and create canopy gaps that would invite those smaller diameter ash trees into the overstory, you may create a situation where they can quickly be contributors to the seed source at that site. So perspective, the timeline's all about perspective.
That's wonderful. Yeah, in the seeds that we sowed from the seeds that you brought from collecting, there's one tiny ash seedling that made it through and decided this was the spring to germinate. And then the rest of them are patiently waiting. Wonderful. Well, it seems like we have gotten through most of the questions that were submitted onto the chat. And given that it's 4:58 and a beautiful day, I just want to say thank you all so much for just spending this hour with us today and talking and bringing both so much of the knowledge that you have been building in community, but also some of your personal experience of this work. And yeah, I've just really cherished this conversation. So thank you. And oh, there's one more question and we have 2 minutes left. So that was great timing. If an ash tree has been treated for EAB, will trees planted from seed be safe for propagating and for animals to eat? That's a good question too, because I know that I'm assuming, Tyler, that's a question for you.
There's been studies on the leaves from trees that were injected, and that does carry high amounts of the insecticide, and that's where a majority of the emerald ash borer adult beetle mortality occurs, because they feed on the leaves when they first emerge for sometimes 2 weeks or more. But as far as the seed, I haven't seen anything that was shared about the seed containing any amounts of the insecticide. The insecticide needs to be reapplied every 3 years, meaning that it does eventually lose its potency in killing insects. So I think if there were years where the seed was potentially dangerous, we could do some testing to figure that out. But at this moment, I don't think that's entirely known. But the value of creating some seed in a situation where it wouldn't otherwise be there because you did treat would outweigh, in my opinion, the potential risk of non-target impact of animals that would, because there's lots of seed predation for ash trees. One of the biggest issues for the regeneration of ash trees. Everyone likes ash seeds, whether they're eating them or we're storing them.
Everyone, the food that's possible and also the growth that's possible, they're a hot commodity. Yeah, and which is another interesting part of the seed collecting and then sowing kind of processes. When you're investing yourself in this work, it's then sometimes wise to make it so that these seeds stay in the human realm more so, even though they are important for the non-human realm as well. Thanks for slipping that question in there. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to add to, just with the studies that have been done, I think it has, again, with some caution still, but I think the benefits do outweigh, some of the costs, and also just taking precautions, like with a lot of the ash trees that might eventually be used to make baskets from trees that have been treated. You would naturally want to, well, it's recommended that you would wait so many years until those chemicals dissipate before you work with that tree, if you were going to use that tree for making baskets. So things kind of steps and other things are kind of being aligned with that as best as possible.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, now it's officially 5:01, so I want to bid you all farewell and thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you everyone for your really thoughtful questions. And yeah, we are excited to continue to do this work. And I hope you now can look to APCAW for a lot of the great information that's coming out of the work that they're doing, and more in-person events, because it is really wonderful to keep learning with them and through them. So thank you all so much. I'm going to save the chat and save this recording, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Well, Ellie, thanks everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.